we're going to go over some of the myths, some strategies, go over some techniques, and then at the end we're going to give some resources. If there's any information that you guys find valuable in these slides, just let me know. I'm happy to share the slides and the information or provide some deeper resources. From our perspective, a lot of you guys might be familiar with commercial databases, and this is what I'm referring to. These commercial tools that a lot of law firms and a lot of investigators subscribe to, your TLO, Accurate, IRB, Thomson has a Clear product. And these are credit header database searches that a lot of people buy. So it's on a pay-per-click basis, or click to purchase basis. And so I kind of want to go over generally what they are, where the data comes from, and kind of some myths around that, okay? So like I said, we kind of know what they are. They're just grabbing the top portion of a credit header, which is your credit profile. So name, social, dates of birth, address history, based on SSN or name and date of birth or address history match. And then from there, that data gets spread all over the place and is aggregated and sold out in a variety of ways. So what do they tell you? The credit headers tell you kind of address history, but keep in mind that there's some issues with regard to that, because if someone's in collection or they live in a cash economy, very limited amount of information is going to be available, because the credit header databases can only pull what's available. So common names, cross socials, junior, senior, that kind of stuff. That's where those kind of get messy. And keep in mind that the information at the top of the credit header is not always the most current, because if a collection letter went out or something was updated on a credit database, that address, that information would pop to the top, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most current. And aliases too. One thing to keep in mind is that the credit header database that comes from those commercial providers is a great tool to develop aliases and information to kind of frame your investigation going forward, so that you can search any and all names and make sure you're being comprehensive. Commercial databases are now pulling utility records and from other data sources, which tend to be more current. One useful thing about utility records is that most people now don't have a home phone, but they typically have some sort of an internet, satellite TV account or whatever, and usually the information on there, like a cell phone, is a really good, useful piece of information when you're trying to track somebody down. So as time goes on and the way that we as consumers interact changes, the records that are available to pull are a little bit better. So if you have access to any of those databases, the utility records are pretty useful. Some of you will have access, so the difference between like a law firm client and an investigative client, maybe that like we may get full socials and dates of birth, you may have truncated socials and dates of birth. This could be useful when you're doing levies on bank accounts, or you're doing research that requires the full socials or the dates of birth if you're trying to run criminal searches. So keep that in mind. A lot of times, keep in mind if it's truncated and it's X'd out, like the last four are X'd out, the database can see it, they're just not showing it to you. So it doesn't mean they don't know what it is and they're not matching it. It just means that it's not available for you to see as the person doing the research. And again, as far as verified information, the information there is very, very much not verified. It's unverified, and it's just really a data source. So be aware, there's a lot of people that resell that data as an investigation or kind of a report. Keep in mind that it's not verified, and make sure you're digging a little bit deeper, looking a little bit deeper. How many of you guys are familiar with like the buzzword open source intelligence or open source intelligence gathering, OSINT? Anybody? So that's kind of, I just put some tips up there. You guys may be familiar with a lot of these, but if you look, this really works across most databases, whether you're talking to Google, Bing, or other kind of search. Also with the inside of protected sites like recorder's office, court sites. But putting quotes is going to give you an exact match. If you wanted to exclude certain things, using the dash in front of that word is a good tool to kind of make it happen a little bit more quickly. If you have a wildcard search, you can use the star in there. These tools are really useful in kind of getting to the heart of the information that you need to have when you're doing a typical Google search. And again, just basic searching techniques. And then putting the or in there, marathon or race if you're not sure. And these types of search queries are great if you're searching for someone where you don't know their middle name and you don't want to exclude them. So you can use combinations of these search queries. If you know it's like Martha Jones, but you don't know the middle initial, and you want to limit it. Remember, if you search Martha Jones, you're just going to get all the Martha Jones inquiries. But if you have a middle initial, you can use those types of search parameters to limit or widen the scope of your search depending on how common the information is or the name is you're searching for. And then also too, this one's pretty useful, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, but if you put in site colon and the search or the website in front of that, any search that you conduct after that query is going to search only that website. So if you're looking for something on YouTube, LinkedIn, or a government site, putting that in first, you know it's on that site, but you're not sure where. This is much better than doing a typical Google search where you're going to get every and all record that comes up, even people that are buying data from those different sites and then aggregating it out for search. So there's many more on from there, but these are kind of the basic ones that I like to share. Public records, are they really publicly available? How many of you guys do public records research in here? Are they really publicly available?
Depends.
What does it depend on?
Well, for instance, we have clients all across the country, so it seems like every city, every state has its own parameters about what's easily available on their website, what's still in paper form. It just really.
Right. So they are technically publicly available, but the challenge is where to find them, how to search for them, and then a lot of jurisdictions are now charging
They're not free
for electronic access to them, right? So whether you need to do it online and create an account or go in person and pay for the records. And so what's happening is slowly but surely those sites that are pulling that information off dramatically impacts what the commercial databases can pull. So while your TLO, your Thomson, your Clear is saying they're pulling the data, LA County, for instance, does not allow scraping of their records without a fee. So those records are not going to be found in those commercial data searches. While they all are publicly available, they are definitely not available through commercial searches, nor are they available for free. And the best tools to find them, right? There's a variety of things out there, but obviously knowing the county searches where you're looking for, understanding Pacer and different search tools that are out there. There's a myriad of them, and I'll give you guys some resources at the end that are kind of the best sites to use to find out where to look in the most expeditious manner to find the records. But there isn't like one click or one website that really has it all, or one commercial provider that has all that data, just because not all of them are available electronically. The one thing too is that what we always thinking about is how to interview those records. What doesn't look right? JDLR just doesn't look right. Like something's missing, and that's what's going to lead you to the next thing. So if you've got a TLO search with a bunch of civil litigation in a county, what county is that available? And then looking on beyond that. So what's not looking quite right? Interview the records, figure out what's going on. To one, make sure they pertain to your subject, but two, making sure that you're being comprehensive in the search to make sure there's what's missing, because a lot of times those records are missing. DMV. Anyone experienced researching DMV? I'll go over this quickly, but why are you laughing?
No, they're so unorganized.
So unfortunately, we live in the state of California where the DMV is run like a well-oiled machine, right?
That's why it's taken me 4.5 months to go get my real ID.
Yeah. So if you think about it from the consumer-facing side of DMV, you can imagine what the back end is like when it comes to trying to pull records and information from the DMV. So how do you get it? So while commercial data providers will say that they're pulling DMV records, they're not. They pull in certain states, but in California, you have to have a requester code and where you're searching for it. So you can get it through, if you're a law firm or insurance company and you have an account or requester code, you can go state by state. So DMV records are not searched nationally, it's state by state. And you can get it through a variety of ways. The challenge is getting it and doing it in an expeditious way. What can you get? So in California, we can run plates and VINs to get registered and legal owners. The one thing we do not get is addresses anymore, so we don't get the address. So we can run Jeannie's plate and we find out who owns it, but it won't tell us the address where she lives, it'll just tell us her name. So if your subject is Tom Smith, it's gonna be very difficult to determine which Tom Smith owns that car. And when might you need it? Typically, we usually see these in personal injury cases, post-accident, figuring out who owned the car at the time of the loss. Insurance cases, who hit me kind of thing, and who to go after, other culpable parties. In California, you can run by plate, you can run by VIN, and I can also run by name and address. So if I know where Jeannie lives, I can run her name and her address, and any vehicles registered there will come up. The challenge is if your vehicles aren't registered at your house, they're not going to come up. They're going to come up. They're going to get a no hit, which doesn't mean that you don't have anything. So we also run driving records typically to figure out what plates people have been violations in, accidents, and other convictions. Then we can run those plates and figure out where they're at. But don't be fooled. There's not like one quick, easy way to search DMV. Pretexting. So is someone give me the best definition of pretexting before I go on to my thing, because this is kind of the sticky area that really, this is the difference between kind of what, ethically speaking, what lawyers and law firms can do and what investigators are allowed to do versus what's been written up in different legislation. So give me a sense of, from your guys' perspective, who's got the best definition of pretexting?
Pretending to be somebody you're not.
Okay. To get information, right? To pull it out. So in the investigative context, pretexting is not really a naughty word, but typically there's ways to do it via phone, using a trap line or blind line service, using it via email, going about through front or fake accounts. In person is a little bit more challenging, right? But there's some really great tools out there that allow you to anonymize who you are when you call. But the key is having a good story. And in order to make a pretext call, you've got to get to a phone number. Some piece of information allows you to connect with that person. In today's day and age, texting is a great way to actually initiate contact through a pretext trap line and initiate contact with your subject. Keep in mind that in different areas of the law, trademark law, for instance, pretexting to determine, even if there's litigation pending, determine if a trademark is being used in commerce or is not, has been deemed by a lot of the district courts as something that is legal and admissible if done by the right folks. A lot of attorneys are worried about outsourcing that work and then having someone make contact with the represented party in a case. But if it's in the course and normal scope of business, it's not such a big deal. It's not like I'm calling Barbara and saying, hey, will you tell me about this accident? And I'm pretending to somebody, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't call you and ask you your representative case. But if you owned a store that was selling counterfeit product, it's not uncommon for someone to call you and say, hey, do you guys sell XYZ product under this brand? And you're like, yeah, here it is. And that's a normal inquiry that the public would make as opposed to something more targeted around the litigation matter as a whole. And that's why I say for located investigations for trademark and service of process, the number one thing that we get is I can't find the person, we need to serve them, and we don't know where they are. So making the phone call and having a solid pretext is a great way to make sure that the address you have off that credit header search is good. Beyond Lexis and Westlaw, property records, again, indexed county by county, state by state. There's a lot of different tools out there, but don't rely upon commercial databases or a Google search because every county is a little bit different. How you query the record, what they provide, and how current and accurate and updated the information is. Employment records. How many people have ever tried to determine if someone's employed elsewhere so you could garnish their wages or figure out what they're doing? How was that? Challenging. And why? Why was it challenging?
Well, for instance, we use Lexis, and we've also used TLO, and they have like an employment section, but it's typically not super reliable, and it may not even be populated for people. And of course, it becomes challenging to just call and say, does so-and-so work there? We have to be a little careful about what we can do. So. Sure.
So I like to remind people, employment is kind of a broad term, right? Because someone could be employed as a W-2 employee, they could work as a subcontractor, or they could have their own business, right? There's not one database provider out there that has access to employment records as a whole. So if they're working for Xerox or they're working for IBM, there's a chance that those databases will pull that up. But if they're working for a small company, $1 million to $5 million service company or contractor, likely it's not going to come up on a commercial database. So that's where other open source intelligence tools like LinkedIn and other things come into play. And also making pretext calls for employment is a great way to do that, using a pretext as a staffing agency to figure out if you engage in the person who's interested in being employed. If they say, no, I'm employed, trying to figure out where they're employed so you won't send them that letter could be useful. But there's not a 100% way of doing that. There are ways to search if someone is W-2 employed. But if they're not a W-2 employee at that particular time of the search, it's going to come back as a negative result, and that doesn't really tell you too much. Again, you want to look for business affiliations and ownership. Way to do that, obviously, is looking for those commercial data providers, but also if you have an email address, looking for the root domain of that email address, and then running a who is search through something like domain tools or elsewhere to figure out who owns that domain if your subject owns that domain name. So a pretty good chance they operate the business or they did, depending if that website is currently active or not. Again, don't rely on Lexis and Westlaw for DMV and vehicle ownership as an asset search tool. It's not comprehensive. It's not updated. It really varies depending on the state. Florida and Texas are pretty solid. California is not. And also making sure you're looking for bankruptcy judgments and liens and knowing where to look for those things to find out if you're looking for assets, you also want to look for liabilities and making sure that the person that you're going after has the ability to repay in the event that you do secure a judgment, or get a sense of if they've got bankruptcy judgments and liens, they're going to be harder to find, more difficult to track down, and they're probably more aware and savvy as to the collection process or the judgment enforcement process. Bank searches. How many people have done bank searches or are familiar with what bank searches involve? somewhat.
Get an investigator for that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just the reason I put it up there is because there's not a 100% guaranteed way to search for bank searches in our system currently. There are some tools and investigators that can be used to do that kind of work, but keep in mind, banks are indexed by name and social. If it's a business account, it's by the business name and the tax ID number, but there's not a 100% guaranteed way to figure out where someone's banking currently in order to pull those. The solid way of doing that is some sort of investigative research and then followed up by subpoena and information, because you're not going to get transactions, balances, wire transfers, and things like that. But if you can figure out where they do bank, then you can issue your subpoenas out. A lot of our clients don't want to issue subpoenas because it triggers things on their side, so they want us to do it discreetly. There are searches that can be done, and I will tell you that another way of, a creative way of getting bank information is through a trash run. So a lot of times in cases we'll pull the trash of the business or the individual, and a lot of times people put their bank statements in the trash. Recently we were able to find additional about $1 million that someone did not disclose on an expense declaration through a trash run. So figuring out where they live, where the trash is, grabbing that in a publicly available setting, and going through that trash can be useful, assuming they don't search it. So you got to be creative in how you go about that.
Well, we had that in the case.
You did?
We did, where we sent a PI out on like 3 separate occasions to do trash runs. It was over a couple-year period. We did exactly the same thing. Just found so many more assets. People just throw it away. Just
Yep.
throw their bills away and their bank statements away.
Yep. A lot of good evidence in the trash.
This is why we all need shredders.
Yes. Crosscut.
Yeah, cross-cut.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, shredding's not good because we'll tape it back together. So typically when we're talking about tracking information on people, what they're up to, who they're associating with, who they're doing business with, are they injured, are they not injured? Surveillance is typically the tool that is used for that. So deploying a field operative in a car to establish what's going on with the subject. This can be really expensive and take a lot of time. So recently there's been some new tool called a vehicle sighting report. Has anyone been aware of this report? No? Anyone? Nobody? So it's good for, I'll give some ideas of when it's useful. So violations of FMLA, tracking like a sales executive or field workers, non-compete agreements or are believed to be violations of non-compete agreements, good in trade secrets and IP theft cases, and also workers' comp claims and fraud. So now what we can do is we can take a plate or a VIN and run it through our database, and it'll tell us where that car has been spotted over years and years of time to the degree that that plate has been picked up. So if we want to know if this person was associating with this other company and we have their car parked there for a month straight or in the vicinity of that area, it gives us a lot of good information. It could be also useful if they're setting up a competing business and they're driving to a new location. So it's a great, really inexpensive way to get actionable intelligence before you take to the field and do surveillance. It obviously could be used in infidelity situations and things like that, but majority of our work is on the business side, so these are some examples of when it could be useful. And it's very, very, it's pretty darn accurate, actually. It's really, really awesome.
How do you access those?
It's a great question. So through our licensing, we have a preferred provider that allows us to access that. So providers like TLO, XP, and Westlaw, they're now reselling it here and there, but we get it directly from the provider. So it is available through those channels, though, as a standalone service if you're a subscriber to TLO, or I believe Accurate and IRB are now providing it as well, but it's a fairly new service.
There's gonna be a broad from all of it, but I'm especially seeing it with this. What about what's coming down through the pipe with the CCPA starting in January?
With regard to?
The Privacy Act. Because this, to me, especially tracking sales executives or field workers or FMLA, that could be right on the cusp of crossing the line with privacy.
Right, and again, to the degree that there'd be a permissible use. So if you have an employee that you believe to be stealing trade secrets or doing unlawful things in the course and scope of work, there'd be a permissible use,
Yes,
right?
that I see that.
Right, if there's a workers' comp claim. But as far as if you called me and said, hey, I'm really curious about my neighbor and what he's up to, I really want to track what's going on because I think that he's dealing drugs, that's a different reason, right?
Well,
So-
say for instance, sales executive might have to go to the doctor, didn't tell his employer. That to me could be on the cusp of.
Right, and that's why, again, with regard to all the stuff and the investigative techniques and tools that are available based on legislation and all the different codes and rules, this is your toolbox. How you use that, when you use that, and the right content.
How it's going to affect this come January, we don't know.
Right, and again, they could pass legislation that shuts this thing down because they say, well, we don't want to allow people to do that. At this point, they've deemed it enough that insurance companies and law firms think that they believe that it's necessary and important enough to have it available. So again, it's subject to change, but again,
Well, everything with a CCPA
Yeah.
is
But
subject to
I
change.
guess though, that doesn't give you their address, right? It gives
No.
you a license plate number and says the car
So
is here,
right.
but it doesn't give that personal information for that CCPA to apply, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's give you coordinates of where the car was and where it was seen, but it's not like saying it's at this house or, went to the doctor, right? So it's really an informational tool that guides other investigations done within the specific legal context of what you're doing. Again, it's not for, I want to track Susie and see what she's up to, because
Well,
I think
yeah,
my
if
girlfriend
it's
is,
If it's used properly,
Yes.
that's great, but I can see it also being not used properly, which,
and I can see that as well.
That's a
Again,
good
put in the hands of the wrong people for the wrong things. That's really why these things get taken away and why legislation changes. Yeah.
Where is that data actually coming from? Is it like cameras, like traffic lights, street
Yeah.
cameras?
Yeah, exactly. So there's an overall technology, I forget the acronym for it, but the license plate recognition technology that is being used, and they're collecting all that data, and then they're aggregating it off of street cameras, all the cameras that are running, and then they're just buying that data and then reselling it off based on what's out there.
don't you have facial recognition cameras all over the place?
Okay, forensics. This is something you guys would probably pay attention to. In our world, what we're seeing is that we get a lot of inquiries on smaller matters, and people want to do forensic imaging of computers and cell phones and any kind of electronically stored information. So what we're seeing is a practical versus a forensic copy. Usually, a forensic copy being the leading thing, but as you guys probably know, it's kind of the wild, wild west, and people are not really understanding what the rules are. Just do it, get it done. So what we're trying to do is work with professionals like yourself to make sure that they understand that. What we're seeing is that, especially in the family law context, the amount of data created off multiple devices is so rampant. Getting our arms around that is very, very difficult. And also when it was created, so was it post-separation or whose device was it at the time? Was it dad's or was it mom's? So from that perspective, I think that the one thing that we see a lot is that mobile devices are a huge thing. iPads, iPhones, Android devices, right? And where those are and getting backups of them so that they can preserve that information. So what we're doing a lot more of now and we're seeing is preservation of text and different things for the purposes of orders in family law court. But my guidance here is to advise clients on understanding where their computers and where the information is. And I think that you guys can relate to this in the sense that most of the time they have no idea where they're creating, where they're storing, where they're backing up that data. So of course, if we have a backup of a cell phone on a laptop, we have access to a lot of information. If it's encrypted or they don't know the encryption code or they don't know where things are being backed up or who's backing up to what device, it can become very challenging. I would say that one tool, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, but an Internet Artifacts tool that's a Cellbrite offshoot. It's a very useful tool as an initial dive after you make that forensic copy as a practical way to actually see what's going on. Running search queries against that, see what's being plugged into that computer, if they're extracting trade secrets and sensitive information, what they've been doing on that site prior could be very, very useful. So for us, what we see is the forensic copy is important, but the search tool and what to look for is even more important because they say I want a forensic copy, but they have no idea what they're searching for. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that search, but the Internet Artifacts tool is remarkable in terms of what it can do and what it can tell you to figure out for our litigators what needs to happen next. Are we going to go forward? Are we going to send a letter? Do we have enough probable cause to actually proceed or not? And so what's your guys' take on that in terms of what you guys are seeing on small projects where people are saying, hey, I believe something's there, go find it. What are the challenges you guys are seeing in that respect?
I have a case that's very much, this is the issue. It was an employment thing where people just like suddenly resigned and took a bunch of customers to a new company, and so there's non-compete issues and all that. And so we got forensic copies and waited like a week for a vendor to run a report and then basically tell us that they didn't find anything. And so I think figuring out, like you said, it's like, okay, I have an exact copy of their computer, but now what? What's the next step to actually find what we're looking for? So.
Right. So the tools are getting better and better, but again, understanding where it is, where to look for, and how to deal with it is something that we're facing quite a bit, and what to search for. What's your search look?
It's also how that data comes out of the phone. I don't think people realize your text messages don't come out of the phone like the way you're looking at them on your phone.
Right.
So we got like a giant Excel file, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and how to work with the data. Some people want native preservation like in PDF format that shows the chronology because they're trying to tell a story. Or if it's in Excel format, they don't even know what they're looking at. Like, where'd this come from? Whose number is this? Like all that kind of stuff that goes on beyond. Once they get it, they're like, I have this, but what does this all mean, right? So a lot of times on our end, it's running those phone numbers to figure out who they belong to, making sure that it's done properly. But the forensic copy is great, but what is it telling you? What is it telling you that happened? And how many USB hard drives were inserted into that computer 5 days before they resigned is way more useful and tells you the story of what to ask, and then you can then frame some questions around that, even if the data has been deleted, written over, or even there's partial information in there. So, social media. So, question. So you guys are a law firm. Can you hack a private account on Facebook or make contact with them? You guys do that all the time? Why not?
It's unethical.
Doesn't mean it's not done.
So, and then then how do you find their deleted photos if you can't even connect with them? So the client knows they're there, right? It's buried in social media somewhere, right? And then how do you do that? Can you do it undetected? So the question becomes, you don't want to become friends with someone you're in litigation with, right? It's ex-party contact with a litigated party. However, there are ways to actually look at deleted photos, and there are always ways to look at content that's been generated by people, even if you are not a friend and you don't have visibility in their account. And you can do it staying undetected. So I'll get into some of those tools. As far as searching and preservation goes, there's Adobe, SiteSucker, there's some paid tools, but we're getting more and more requests for preservation of those accounts for whether it's paper or otherwise electronic. But there's a lot of different ways to do that depending on how much data you have and how much time you have to actually extract those. So I will direct you guys, if you guys want to know more about social media searching, there's a company called Intel Techniques out of Canada. Unfortunately, a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you on the free side has been shut down because they've been hacked numerous times, so they've had to put it behind a paid website. But the way that you go about doing this on Facebook is does everyone have a Facebook account? Nobody? How many people have a Facebook account? Okay, so behind that Facebook account is a Facebook tracking ID. There's a number that's associated with that. Once you have that number, I can see anyone that's tagged you, any pictures, deleted, undeleted, all across the platform. But I have to develop that number first. So you do the lookup ID, you put in the Facebook profile, it's going to generate that number. Once you have that number, then you can run that Facebook ID search against all these different things, photos, videos, places, all those different things, even at one time, to figure out what's going on. And this is the way you get around the idea of being friends with someone in order to find out what they've posted. So if somebody else tagged you in a post or posted something and listed you, whether it's text, a picture, or video, it's going to come up. So once you have that information, you're kind of home free. So this information is super useful. This would be what's called open source intelligence. And there's a variety of ways to do that. And again, Facebook is always changing how we go about doing that. But it's a really, really great tool to figure out what's been going on, who they've been interacting with, and if there's actually an account out there. This also works really well if your subject does not. So you don't have a Facebook profile, but does anyone in your family have a Facebook profile?
My children.
Your children, right? So if I knew all of your children and I searched for them, I guarantee they've taken pictures and things and activities that you've been engaged with on Facebook that you may or may not even be aware of, but now I have that information, know where you've been going, what you've been doing. You were jumping out of that airplane and you were doing, traveling, even though you said that, that was something that was impossible, right? For you based on your leg condition because you fell at work, right? So just because you don't think you're on Facebook, you might be unknowing. So, or spouses are the number one other way. I point this out, I don't know how much of you guys use Twitter, but Twitter is pretty useful. You can do some really advanced searches. This is a couple examples of some things that have come out. People that are staging slip and falls. People post some pretty dumb things on on Twitter. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times if geotagging is turned on, if you're trying to find a witness or you're dealing with that, you can figure out when and where these people were when they posted this, and you can also run searches that are geotagged to a different area. So if you're trying to find information about an accident that occurred in a given area and you're trying to find people that saw it, it's a great tool to figure out who was there, right? Based on what people are posting. But these are some ideas of, this person put, this person saw a Dr. Pepper truck crash. This one said, just saw this accident. Those are the people you want to talk to if your client's saying, hey, I need you to figure out who are the additional witnesses beyond what's on the police report, right? Could be super useful. People also do some pretty dumb stuff, about to pull a slip and fall, settle out of court, easy money, things like that people are putting on there. So in the course of, don't forget about Twitter when you're doing your profiling. So Facebook's great, Instagram's awesome, but Twitter's like kind of like that sounding board where people share a lot of information about what they're up to. On my way to depositions, some lady at Vaughn's for an alleged slip and fall, right? So people put that information out there. And I believe I'll give the links out, but there's a specific URL you can go to do an advanced search on Twitter. I'll briefly go over surveillance. Preparation leads to results. Verified identifiers and addresses. You want to know who the people are, who they associate with, where they work, what their activities are. You want to know what kind of cars they drive. You want to have all that information ahead of time. You want to do your full social media profile. In California with DMV, we do not get access to photos on the driver's license. So having a good picture, whether it's from the client or from social media, is super valuable to provide to whoever you're using to do your surveillance. Again, we talk about determining vehicle zone, doing that prior through DMV. Activities checks versus surveillance, determining what someone's activity level is versus full-blown surveillance. There's a couple different variations there. And you want to know those objectives. What are you trying to determine? Are you trying to determine that they're injured? Are you trying to determine cohabitation? Are they employed there? Are they associating with somebody? What are you trying to prove? That formulates when you're going to set up, what you're going to do, and when you would break off, or what you want to obviously continue surveillance when if you determine an activity is within the scope of that strategy. So I'll go over a couple of these. These are free and paid tools that we have up here. So domaintools.com is one of the best whois searches out there. So if you want to find out who owns a domain name, I highly recommend domaintools.com. They have a free and a paid version, but it gives you current and historical information for website ownership, going back as long as that site's been there. Whitepages.com is one of the best people searches. They have, again, a free and a paid version, but really great way to develop information and profiling. They almost pull information from credit headers and then crossover emails and phone numbers on there. And they have a paid and a free version. Archive.org. So has anyone used archive.org, the Wayback Machine? So if you want to look at what a website looked like 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, it caches websites that are HTML coded going back as far as possible. So if you want to know what a website looked like at a given point in time, it's a great tool. Also, you can use the Google Cache tool, which means that you're going to navigate to that site, and within Google, you're going to the drop down, you're going to select cached, and you can see what Google cached on that page going back quite some time. So those two tools are really good for website archival and caching. Pipple's a really good people search. It just converted in the last 2 weeks from free to paid, but it's a really great search for profiling people. And if an account there is not very expensive, it's very, very solid information when you're profiling. And unicourt.com, this is a free court search site. And this is the closest thing that really is out there to a comprehensive county by county, state by state search tool to figure out what's out there. What's cool about this too is that it will allow you to search for cases by the filing attorneys. So a lot of courts don't post that information, but they've somehow been able to extract a lot of that data. So if you want to know if an attorney's filed like numerous cases in a certain jurisdiction, this tool has been able to pull that up for us. So it's pretty useful. Blackbookonline.info is kind of a repository of public records, where they're housed, how to find them. If you go there and you were curious about how to find out, if someone has an FAA registration, or you want to know if someone has some random license in Kentucky, Black Book helps you to kind of navigate through and figure out where to search for those things. Rocketreach.co, it's a great email lookup tool. So if you need to find an email address for somebody, this goes out and it figures out the email sequencing for companies. It's really good for an employment situation. So if you work at ABC company and there's first initial last name at whatever company, it will find that, which is a really great thing to have, especially if you want to conduct in-depth searches and find out maybe if they're doing an employment search and you want to figure out if they're already on LinkedIn. There's a search tool out there that allows you to actually run that email address against the LinkedIn database to see if that person ever used that email in the course of filing, setting up their LinkedIn page. But also gives you the ability to figure out, a lot of other information about them, especially if you need to send a pretext email to them. You want to know how to do that. And again, inteltechniques.com. It was a great free resource until about a week ago, but check it out. They have tons of open source intelligence tools for almost all the things that I've talked about, and it's amazing tool set. They're the ones that developed the Facebook search tool and all those other techniques that I talked about. One thing that we do in our business is a lot of undercover buys of infringing and counterfeit goods. Keep in mind that a lot of the sites that are out there are tracking IP addresses, so they know where you're coming from. So if you say you're in Alabama and you're really in California, they know based on your IP address. So whether you're doing open source intelligence or you're making online buys, a Tor browser is the way to go. It's anonymizing your IP address. It's a free tool. There's a lot of other ones out there, but this is going to, in essence, prevent whoever site you're on from detecting who you are, where you're coming from. So how many of you guys work at a big law firm? Anybody? Or a big company that tracks your IP address, right? They track when you log in, right? So that IP address is owned by the company. So anytime that you guys hit a website, that website knows exactly who you are and where you're coming from. So if you're thinking you're doing a discrete online investigation, be careful because they'll blacklist that. We've had cases where our attorney clients will be blacklisted from that website because they know what's going on. They're like, the site doesn't come up. I'm like, yeah, because you've been on it like 100 times and they know you're there. So be careful of that, and anyone that you're working with, be sure you're careful of that.